Going live here. This is Hannibal here live 12:49 a.m. for the HannibalTV.com. It's slow wrestling news day today, I believe, because of Thanksgiving weekend. The ratings for Raw last night are delayed. They haven't come in. The major news of today, which isn't really major, but Wade Barrett is replacing Jim Cornette as the NWA commentator. I believe from what I saw of the NWA show last week, they didn't have much wrestling on it last week, but they seem to have cut Jim Cornette out of last week's episode. But I did watch a good chunk of this week's episode, and they used Jim Cornette on commentary because it was a pre-taped episode, so they didn't cut him out. But they made this announcement that Wade Barrett, who has been off WWE TV since 2017 and has a British accent, which is interesting, will be replacing Jim Cornette. So interesting choice. Not a guy that's really has much NWA affiliation. I have nothing against him. He has done an interview for the Hannibal TV, but I do find it to be an interesting choice. Apparently, he lives in New York City now, from what I understand. So it's not like it's going to be an expensive plane ticket that they're flying him in from the UK or anything like that. Luke Skype Stalker says, "I'll miss Jim though." I don't know if anyone could replace Jim Cornette in that role, to be honest, because he, has such a connection with the NWA. The only wrestlers with a connection to the NWA now in the NWA are the Rock and Roll Express. Desmond Castro says, "Hi, everyone." The other little tidbit of news I've heard today while listening to Eric Bischoff's podcast as Sage Antone says Wade is the worst, is that, what's his name? Conrad Thompson, who never credits me whenever he references any of my interviews on any of his podcasts. Which, by the way, Steve Austin always credits me. He's credited me at least 3 times. So I have a lot of respect for Steve Austin. But one interesting thing I heard on Eric Bischoff's podcast today was Conrad Thompson tried to get Vince McMahon's brother, Rodrick McMahon, as a guest on one of his StarCast autograph conventions, but it didn't work out. So yes, apparently Vince McMahon does have a brother named Rodrick McMahon, which I didn't know about until today. Maybe that would be an interesting interview for me to score down the road, but apparently he's very successful. So chances of that would be interesting. What's his name? Kawaski says, "Not a fan of Conrad, but I love his interviews with Arn." I like his podcast. I just am insulted when he quotes me and doesn't credit me. I find that's cheap. I always credit people if I reference them. But I do, it is a little disturbing hearing a big fat guy like him talk about Blue Chew all the time. And now I notice he's also like doing diet advertisements on his podcast, which, considering the size of him, I find to be funny. I don't need Blue Chew, by the way. If anything, I have too much natural testosterone flowing through my system. Jay Smith says, "Great Billy Jack Haynes interview. That was crazy." By the way, my full Billy Jack Haynes, Shane Douglas, and Sandman interviews are now at patreon.com/the Hannibal TV, ad-free. I'm almost done the Hillbilly Jim one. I'm about halfway through that one. A lot of people have asked me, do I believe Billy Jack Haynes was an accomplice to a murder like he claims? I'll be perfectly honest with you. No, I do not believe that. I believe he suffers from CTE. I believe he may have been connected with the underworld at various points, but if there was any legitimate connection, he's been telling this story for a few years now. I believe he'd be in jail. He's saying he's an accomplice to a murder of 2 kids. That's a pretty serious admission, and it has been on the local news in Arkansas. I'm sure the police have done some investigating into it, and obviously they would have at least brought him in for some formal questioning if there was truth to that. His ex-wife, Jeannie Clark, asked me to take down the video of him alleging that Chris Adams beat her because she said that Chris Adams did not beat her at all. He did cheat on her, but she said out of respect to her, please take it down. So I did. So I believe that he suffers from CTE. I don't believe he's seriously spreading false information. His memory just maybe isn't all there. And some of the stuff he said in that interview was certainly true. Anthony Shabbat says John Morrison is back in the WWE. He's signed. Has he debuted yet? I don't know if he's debuted yet. I don't believe he has debuted yet. Someone says, I believe that Billy believes he was involved in a murder. Yeah, I mean, I believe that definitely he worked in the underworld at various parts in his life. A lot of wrestlers have. Okay. We've all done stuff, and I've been directly involved with wrestlers that have, as they were still working in there. And in my life, I've dealt with some underhanded people as well. So luckily, I've lived a pretty clean life, but there's always been a connection of wrestling in the underworld. But did Billy Jack Haynes actually assist in that Boys in the Track murder? No, I don't believe that at all, because yes, he would be in jail right now, or he wouldn't be still telling this story publicly for years if there was truth to it. I believe he suffers from brain trauma. But there is one interesting part of that. He was not wrestling for WWE the night of those murders. That is a fact. People have researched that. He was off from WWE on the night of those murders. So that's one thing that leaves some margin for error there. He could have, in theory, done it because he wasn't wrestling for WWE that night. Anthony Shabbat says John Morrison hasn't debuted yet. Yeah, we don't know which brand he's going to debut in. Devious One says, I think Shane Douglas believes Billy Jack Haynes. I don't. Yeah, Shane Douglas has done some research into it, and he believes that there could be some truth to that, for sure. That's why I included the clip of Shane Douglas's interview with the Billy Jack Haynes clip. Kawaski says, why did Billy Jack Haynes have gloves on during the interview? I'll be honest, it was fairly cold in Philadelphia. I don't know if he wore them for the full interview. There was 2 parts of that interview. We did have a lunch break. It was an extended interview. I didn't notice he had gloves on during the interview, to be perfectly honest with you. Otherwise, I would have asked. The only thing I can assume is he came in from the cold and forgot to take them off. That's the only possible thing I can think of. Jay Smith says, if the Clintons weren't involved, I would call BS, but he knows too much. I don't know about the Clintons being involved. I'm not really into conspiracy theories. I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. Rio McLevin says, I think NXT would look good for John Morrison. The only thing is, as I've stated in this, with bringing a star like John Morrison to NXT is WWE wrestlers get downside guarantees. So they get a base salary that they're paid whether they wrestle or not. And then every time they wrestle, they get a percentage of the house. So if you're wrestling for NXT, who at Full Sail gets 400 fans, and when they're doing tours, like from what the attendance I've read, a lot of times it's less than 100 fans for NXT shows. For the takeovers, yes, they get in the thousands, but how often do they run those takeovers? So I would think if you're working for NXT, your bonus money is not going to be as much as it would be on a main touring brand where you're wrestling house shows and getting the bonus pay. So unless they're overcompensating for that by paying a guy like John Morrison or Finn Balor more, I don't know why you would want to be on NXT, because you would make less money as a performer. You would travel less. So I guess that's a good thing. But Dio says, have I ever tried out for WWE? Yes, I tried out for them. Yes, I had a contract offer from them at one point. But there's a long story on that you guys can look up online. I had a health issue at the time. My contract was rescinded. I've been clear since December 2013 with a clean bill of health, but no major company has ever given me another chance. Somebody, Daltono, says, I hope Teddy Hart slaps a taste out of my mouth. Don't expect that to ever happen. Ted Hart and I had a disagreement at the Hannibal TV live event. We did the Hannibal TV taping interview back in August. It's up on the Hannibal TV. And he was not being cooperative that day. Actually, he ripped off the fans, to be honest, that day, because that was supposed to be an hour interview. He only went half an hour. But we've made up since then. We're back on speaking terms. Ted and I go back a long ways. I'd rather not feud with my friends. Master Joe 3000 says, are Billy Jack Haynes and I cool now? I did that interview because you fans requested it. So we did. I really have no issue with him anymore. No, I did the interview. Do I want to necessarily work with him regularly? No. You don't make your own indie wrestling. Yes, I have my own indie company, Great North Wrestling. Yes, because as I've stated in previous interviews, why I don't wrestle on, first of all, I'm not wrestling anymore. I'm focusing on interviews. But when I did wrestle, why I wrestle mainly for myself was you make more money as a promoter. I paid my dues in Stampede wrestling for $20 or less, $50, $75 a night. Never made more than 75 for Stampede wrestling unless I was promoting an event. I wrestled in Puerto Rico for years. When I came back to Canada, I never wanted to wrestle for $50 in Legions or halls. So unless it was a promoter that was willing to pay me $300 or $400 to wrestle, I really wasn't interested in it because I could make more money bouncing and not have to travel. So that's why you didn't see me wrestle for that many companies outside of Great North Wrestling as Hannibal when I came back to Canada from Puerto Rico. Was I a Hogan or Flair fan growing up? Jay Smith is asking me. More of a Flair fan for sure. Explosive Phoenix, is Wade Barrett done wrestling? Well, he's commentating rather than wrestling. I haven't heard of him wrestling much. I really haven't heard of him wrestling at all since he left WWE. So, yeah, I guess so. Adrian says, who are my 3 favorite wrestlers of all time? Off the top of my head, Ric Flair, The Undertaker, and Macho Man, I would say. Ralph Vaquero says, yeah, they weren't paying me enough on indies. Yeah, everyone believes there's like a myth on there that indie wrestlers make a lot of money. If you were like, here's a funny bit. I'll just explain to you guys right now. There's a match between Lanny Poffo and I that has over 60,000 views on YouTube. Okay, and that night, it was in the middle of nowhere, New Brunswick. Someone convinced me to run an event there, which we've never come back to New Brunswick in years because it didn't draw well there for us. And the local people that were supposed to help us promoting didn't help. But a lot of people commented on that. Oh, Lanny's not making much money. There's like less than 100 or 100 people in the crowd. Well, let me tell you guys something about indie wrestling. The legends always get a guarantee. So I forget what Lanny was getting, maybe 750 US, maybe around that. I don't exactly remember for that match, but they get a guarantee no matter how many people are in the crowd. And there was some comments on that match recently saying, man, I guess after that match, he decided to hang it up. But no, that match was 10 years ago. But for the people that are like saying, oh, man, these guys can't wrestle, there's 100 people in the crowd. Well, that match has over 60,000 views. And the backstage incident that happened after that match has hundreds of thousands of views. So even though there was a low crowd there that night, at least it had tons of views on the internet. But yes, as an independent performer, if you're not a WWE legend working for like a serious amount of money, or a guy that has a name on the indie scene, like a Pierre Carl Ouellet from Ring of Honor, for instance, he would make a good chunk of money for an indie date. But a regular wrestler for an independent appearance doesn't make much. Trust me on that. They don't make much at all. You're basically wrestling for the experience. So Eric Foster says the Rock and Roll Express title match on NWA was sad. Matthew 27 says PCO is not human. Lastly, I'm going to close up here because I've been going 15 minutes plus already. PCO's contract with Ring of Honor has expired. He hasn't announced whether he's re-signed with Ring of Honor yet. He told me that his contract for a year that he signed last year, he was making the six figures. So I find that interesting. That's one of the reasons why PCO took no independent dates over this past year that he hadn't agreed to prior to signing. That's why he never wrestled for Great North Wrestling this past year, even though in the year 2017, his whole comeback was based out of his Great North Wrestling appearances. And he's admitted to me that he got a lot of his US bookings from his The Hannibal TV matches. He didn't wrestle for us last year. So it's going to be interesting if Ring of Honor coughs up the money to sign him to a good contract, or if he jumps over to AEW, because he did tell me that AEW was also interested in him last year. But he didn't sign because they didn't have their TV deal. They weren't really like going last year. So there we go. We're going to find out probably. He is wrestling, by the way, for the Ring of Honor title on their next pay-per-view, whether he's re-signed or not. So I guess we're going to find out. I mean, obviously, if he hasn't re-signed, if he's going to AEW, we know he's not going to win the title. So maybe that's why they're keeping it quiet. And maybe if he has re-signed, maybe we will see him take that Ring of Honor title. We never know. Mr. I saw a video clip posted on the Venom page on Twitter about the two kids on the track story. Yeah, it is a real story. It's a legit story. Billy Jack's Haynes' involvement in it is questionable because he's confessed publicly and he's not in jail. So Explosive Phoenixes, is Marty Scurll signed to AEW? Well, Marty Scurll, to close this off, apparently he has the same deal as PCO. He's appearing at Final Battle, but we don't know if he's re-signed with ROH or not yet. Brody Steele and the other bigger guy whose name escapes me now from Ring of Honor, it's going to come to me. Another popular guy in Ring of Honor, I just forget his name. His contracts Jeff Cobb. Brody King and Jeff Cobb, their contracts expire soon as well. So there could be a lot of moving around in Ring of Honor. By the way, PCO apparently asked Ring of Honor about me. He wanted to try and bring me into Ring of Honor. And the answer that they gave him is they're more interested in bringing in students from their school than me, which I definitely feel is a huge mistake on their part. I have a good channel here. I could definitely have promoted my matches for Ring of Honor and got them more viewers. They're not drawing well at all attendance-wise lately. So they could certainly use new eyes on the product. So have a good night, everybody. Oh, last question. This is an easy one. Thoughts on Grimm's Toy Show? I've never seen it. I don't watch that stupid crap. See you guys later. Have a good night.